live now.
Good. Hello.
One moment.
Okay.
Okay, we can start now then.
Okay, great. Hello to everyone watching us here tonight. My name is Bernd Schmutz, and this is the second of our series of this semester's talks on Umbau and transformation. And last time before Christmas, we were reaching out here from TU Dresden to Prague. And this time we're very happy that we're going to Brussels and that AgwA are here with us tonight. And that's Harold Fallon from AgwA. Warm welcome to Harold and to your partners. Greetings from our side here to you. I'll give a quick introduction before we start with Harold Fallon's lecture. AgwA have been founded quite a while ago in 2003 already. And so it's been a long time since you've been exploring these topics of transformation that are now really pressing and on everyone's table. So you have gained a reputation for these works, and you're going to present 3 projects and some smaller ones tonight around Umbau and the reuse and the recycling of existing structures. Topics like flexibility, reversibility, multiplicity, and circulation have been on your agenda already for a while. You have founded your practice with 2 partners, with Benoit Burkel and Benoit van der Burke. It's interesting that many of your projects are also in neglected areas that haven't received as much attention as inner city sites. Your architecture is not as object-driven. It does reject material luxury and sensation. And there's a different way that you're dealing with costs, turning it into a creative process, which we're going to hear about soon. And Harold Fallon has studied at KU Leuven and Louvain, but you later did also a PhD in Melbourne. And since 2007 already, you have been teaching first at St. Lucas, but then also at KU Leuven. And much of the practices work has been published. Broadly, you have received a numerous list of prizes, and you have also published your own book, which is called Chantier, quite good and telling title for the practice and work you're doing. Tonight, the title of your lecture is Ingirum imus nocte et consumimur igni, and I think we're now all very curious to hear what it's all about. So, Harold Fallon, we hand over to you, and thanks already now for coming and joining us.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe before I share the screen and start, you talked about the economy of means and the neglected areas and so on. Probably it's something that is not only due to our own will, but also the context, which was the context of the city of Brussels when we started the office. So we had to work in this context in which there were very little means for quite complicated plots in neglected neighborhoods. But of course, as architects, you want to transform that into something valuable that you find interesting. And so that's how it grew. And probably the Belgian scene is quite living today and looked at. And probably that's a link to this context also in a large way. So maybe, and so thank you very much for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here, of course. Even if I would have loved to be in Dresden tonight, but that will be for another time. So I'll try to share the screen. You have it? Yes?
No, not yet.
Okay. This is better?
Yes, here we go.
Full screen. In hirum imus nocte et consumimur igni. It's a weird title, so this deserves a little bit of explanation, probably. It's a palindrome. It means that you can read it from left to right and from right to left indifferently. It's a Latin dactylic hexameter. So it's, let's say, it's the oldest known form of Greek and the Latin poetry. And it means we whirl or we turn in rounds into the night, and here we are consumed by the fire. There is, in fact, in the title, the exe is missing. In fact, the sentence needs the exe to be complete as a dactylic hexameter. We whirl in the night, and here we are consumed by fire. Or we could say we whirl around our consumption, and we end up burning our wings. Or maybe it's we talk and debate in ignorance, but we are devoured by passion at the same time. Or we build and rebuild, but in the end, everything gets consumed. So I thought maybe it means something for a lecture talking about the idea of Umbau. The sentence is about ignorance and motivation, what moves you, about exploration and action. It is about process, the walking, and energy, about repetition, the circular aspect, and finality. It is a work of incredible patience and precision. To construct such a sentence is quite an achievement. It is a sentence that says what it does, and at the same time, it does what it says. The sentence was used, reused, misused, as I am doing tonight, probably. Virgil is the hypothetical author. Umberto Eco, in the name of the rose, uses the sentence too. There is a very nice installation by Sarit Wynne Evans at the Singel in Antwerp, in which he constructed a wooden structure that was burnt down, that carries the name of the sentence. There are music pieces of guitarist Stefano Piglia. And then, of course, there is the eponymous movie and book by Guy Debord. Guy Debord is a situationist. You may know it's a revolutionary movement in the 70s, which aimed at somehow unifying art, politics, theory. It was a critique of advanced capitalism and of the spectacle, which was seen as its vehicle. And of course, the spectacle today, well, with this kind of lecture, with Instagram, the communication all over, it means something. The situationists, they wanted to counteract the spectacle, and maybe in some way, by making use of the spectacle itself, as he made this movie. Now I will try to misuse the movie and to appropriate it in the lecture. Don't be afraid, it will not be the movie itself, I will just take some stills and the translated text that goes together with it. It's a long monologue with a flow of images. The movie itself, in fact, is reusing other movies, so it's also quite interesting in the framework today. And I will simply read these small sentences, which maybe can mean something for the lecture, for the topics, for the projects. I don't know, but I found them interesting, triggering, and wanted to share them with you. Whatever the era, nothing of importance has ever been communicated by being gentle on the public. This public, so perfectly deprived of freedom and which has endured everything, deserves less than any other to be spared. I will start with a series of pictures that were used in another lecture in which, together with Doug Allard from Xavier de Geiter Architects, we were playing a kind of ping-pong game of images, and he had proposed a picture of Gordon Matta-Clark, you know, the big cuts in the buildings. And I wanted to react with that with, let's say, rather formless actions that happen in architecture. It was about holes and heaps. This is a construction site of the ECAM site in Brussels. There is a big hole that was dug for the foundations. This is here at my home, the first days of the work, and some demolitions started. And then you have quite interesting situations of these volumes that appear in space, the light that appears too. But sometimes these heaps, they happen for utilitarian reasons, like here, again, in the campsite, there is a slight level difference, and then the contractor makes this slope with the earth that is there just to make the access possible. This is a picture of the construction site of Takeda that I will show later, in which we reused rock wool, mineral wool elements, and in order to be able to reuse them, we had to stock them on the site, and so kind of temporary use appears. And then this one is another project I will show a little bit later on. It's an exhibition palace in Charleroi, but the building is built on a slope. And through the project, we aim at revealing this slope inside the architecture itself. Of course, heaps and holes do not appear only in architecture world, but artists have used it also. This is a picture of When Face Moves Mountains by Francis Alice. It's in South America, in Peru, I think, in which hundreds of people were asked to walk over the mountain by moving the ground in order to move the mountain. And after their passage, the mountain is, of course, always the same, but at the same time, it has moved slightly. And probably what is at stake here is also something about the meaning of the action itself as a kind of, let's say, social action. And this is a work by Lara Almarsegui, who works a lot on resources and of course the image works with the heaps and the holes, but I found it very interesting because in a small text that was accompanying an exhibition, it was suggested that before the Industrial Revolution, the economy was very related to the use of the surface. The forests, the fields, the pastures. And so the limitation of the resources was something very tangible. But then, with the Industrial Revolution, appeared also the science of geology and the idea of extraction, which gave the impression of limitless materials to be used. And so, together with the limitlessness of these resources, the lack of limits in maybe the consumption and the activity that we can have. Here in this installation, I think it's in Venice in the Biennale, and it's a building that was demolished, and the material of the demolition was just put in the pavilion to be shown. And I was wondering, maybe with the idea of reusing buildings, of transformation, also of circularity, of reusing materials that you can use from existing buildings, there is again a kind of a surfacic approach of our activity in construction, and which also gives again the sensation of the limits of what is available. And yeah, I think it's quite, I found it quite inspiring. It can be said with certainty that no real contestation can be carried out by individuals who, by exhibiting it, have become somewhat more socially elevated than they would have been by refraining from it. Okay. I will talk you about my home. So you see the red line is showing you the plot. It's a very small building block in Molenbeek in Brussels, very dense. We have about 20 neighbors here. That's a picture from the first day of the works. It was a very weird construction, not very qualitative. Concrete structure built over the years. Nothing is straight. Yeah, it is what it is. There is no light, no exterior space. The second level. You see this kind of juxtaposition of, in French you would say n'importe quoi. It's a bit of everything next to each other, and in the end there is something that resembles a building. The idea here was to live here with the family, and also to have workshop. It's the space where I'm in for the moment, for ceramics, because my wife is a ceramist, and so this space is shared with a couple of other people, also ceramists, and also the family. Camila is studying architecture, Victor is at the art school, so this space can be used by different people. There was also the idea that we would have to create some exterior spaces, which you can see here in green, and with the rent of placing a greenhouse on the roof, because that's cool. Very first sketches. And from there, the project evolves. It's about the vertical circulation, opening up the structures to find the spaces that you need at the ground floor. We were foreseeing to have a large space on the second floor for living. You see a huge kitchen on the upper left corner of the floor. Also, coming back, you see the two staircases next to each other. We have plenty of space, so it's there to be used. And then on top, some sleeping rooms and the greenhouse. The project evolves a little bit, and there we have the volumetry. The building permit is introduced on something that looks like the plans that you have just seen. We start the works, some demolitions. It reveals the structures. We can keep some walls to have a little bit more of intimacy from the terrace towards the neighbors and vice versa. To those who are annoyed that they do not understand all the allusions or even admit that they are unable to distinguish my intentions clearly, I would only reply that they should feel sorry for their own lack of culture and sterility and not for my ways. That's quite arrogant, no? They wasted their time at the university where small stocks of tattered knowledge are sold hastily. We were starting the works. It was in late 2018, start of 2019. And at the same time in Brussels, I don't know if in Germany you had the same manifestations, but we had mainly two really big manifestations in the center of Brussels for the climate in December 2018, February 2019, and then it was followed by school strikes by the children with the same kind of reivindications. We were starting the works, and I was wondering, well, in fact, I asked my son who was going striking the school, but okay, but what are you exactly asking for? And he said, yeah, you know, it's for the environment, it's very important. And I was not very satisfied with the answer. And so I tried to understand what it was about. Maybe today it's a little bit clearer, but at the time I had the feeling it was a very generalistic way of asking for something. And I did not understand what it really was about. And I'm explaining all this because it really influenced a lot the further evolution of the project. So what you see here on the lower part of the screen is that it's about ambitious climatic politics to obtain a maximum of 1.5 degrees of climate change. And that seems quite nice, but I could not understand why exactly 1.5 would be the right number. So I started to do a series of searches in Google just to find digits and to try to, or informations and try to understand. And so I fell upon this graph from the NASA in which you see the calculated temperature, average temperature on the globe for the last 5 million years. And you see that plus 1.5 according to today's temperature would mean a temperature that that was there like 5 million years ago, when Homo sapiens was there for 500,000. So it seems to be indeed a good idea to see if it's possible to avoid that. But then what does that mean? And so I completed researches and I fell upon this graph, which is by the Global Carbon Project, and it was published on Yale. So I thought, well, that seems quite serious. And what you see here is that if you want to really achieve that, you would have to reduce the carbon emissions to net negative global emissions. And frankly, I do not understand how you can achieve that, if not by reforesting massively and by stopping all human activity. So I started wondering, well, let's see at least what happens if we try to stick to the yellow line. Seeing also that in 2018, the graph was in 2014, I think, so we were already going up. So really not on the way of the net negative global emissions. It's quite easy to divide this 37.5 gigatons per year, to divide that by the world population, to calculate the amount of CO2 that is produced and that would be emitted per person. And if we want to halve to get to the yellow line, you can also do this calculation quite easily. But then, of course, we would have to take into account the increase of the population in the world, going from 7.4 in 2015 to about 11 million probably in 2100, which reduces the available amount, which if you do the calculation, you see that you have a kind of capital of 1.65 ton CO2 per person. In Belgium, at the time of the searches I did in 2018, we were at 833. In Germany, it appeared there, which is a nice coincidence. It's a little bit higher, probably because at the time there was more coal in Germany, I suppose. And if you look to France, for example, it's about half Belgium, probably because of the nuclear power plants there. 1.65 ton per inhabitant. What does that mean? In order to have a grasp on that, I suppose that you could say that 33% goes to the system, you know, the hospitals, the musea, the infrastructure that you cannot really reduce to a person. And then the 66 other percent would be what we consume in our daily lives, in which we can maybe try to understand what it means. If we divide that by 4, we can have an estimate, very rough estimate of what that means in transport, housing, alimentation, consumption, for example, which mean that we have 250 kilogram CO2 per year allowance for the housing. Looking at the average use in Belgium, we see that we are way above this amount of CO2. In fact, here it's in kilowatt hour, but you can translate that in CO2 by calculating the weight of a kilowatt hour in CO2. I did it with gas because most houses in Belgium are heated by gas. So we are today, or at the time of the project, the average in Belgium was about 1.25 tons per year, which is 5 times what is possible. From there, I was getting more or less crazy that we're thinking at the office, but I tried to understand in housing what that means regarding the idea of insulation. And so I started to do some graphs or tables in which I tried to see which was the most effective option in terms of energy, taking into account the gray energy of the transformation works. Meaning what happens if you do a low energy renovation, what happens if you do not do a renovation, what happens if you do passive renovation, what is the difference if you use polyurethane or mineral wool or hemp. And the tables are wrong, there are errors in them, but what you see at the beginning, and it seems obvious, the first years, the best thing to do is not to renovate, because then you don't have this gray energy production in the first years. I started to refine it and to refine it more. And what I integrated, I think not in the former, but here what I integrated also if you look very well in small characters, next to the no renovation, there is also the idea of not renovating half of the building and also not heating half of the building. And what I saw then, even more if you combine that with a heat pump, which is alimented by wind energy, is that for decades, the best solution is not to insulate, in fact, and also not to heat half of the building, which I found very striking. And also because at the office, most of the buildings we are asked to refurbish, they were already refurbished or they were built in the last 40 years, which means if you do an action about energy savings that will not be reimbursed in a way in the first 40 years, it just doesn't make sense to do it, because then it means that you will consume more by renovating and insulating. Whether it is true or not, it really impacted the project. We decided to reduce drastically the heated spaces. So this is the ground floor, and the blue line you see is the surface that was foreseen to be heated in the building permit. And as we were actually starting the works towards this, and we decided at once to reduce it to the red zone in the middle. So this is really the heated workshop. It becomes this smaller core inside the building, which means that the space on the left has become exterior terrace, and the space on the right is became a non-heated entrance hall. The same happened on the first floor where our housing is. Instead of spreading the heated livable space on the entire floor, we reduced it to the red zone here also, which means that on the right there is a non-heated zone. In these months it is really cold there. In summer it's a very nice extension of the house. And the same happened on the upper floor, in which only the rooms are heated, which means also that we had to insulate them just to reduce the heated cores in the building. A good idea never comes alone. As we started the demolition, we were able to do some verifications of the structure, and the engineers said, we might have a problem because the structure, according to the calculations, should fall down. It should not be able to sustain itself. So we had to find a way to reinforce the structure. An article was circulating at the office at the exact same moment. It was circulated between collaborators, and we had some discussions about that. You can find it on the internet very easily. It's a quite long article talking about all the disasters that the systematic use of concrete brings for the environment, but also for the economy, but also for social aspects and so on. It's a quite instructive article. And so, as the reflection was starting, it's a little bit difficult to interpret this drawing, but the first ideas were to reinforce the structure with concrete, in fact. Simplified version, but still with concrete. But then at some point we thought, could we imagine a way not to use concrete at all in the structure of the building? And bit by bit, a wooden structure appeared to sustain the beams. Wooden slabs were also provided. And what you see in this drawing, it was an exchange with the engineer, is that we have the consequence of that, of these new columns, is that we need foundations. So the concrete that we would not use in the beams, in fact, we had to use it to do the foundations of the wooden columns, and all benefit was lost. But we were not discouraged, and tried to understand better how we could really avoid it, the use of concrete. And at some point, the idea appeared to put the beams or the columns on the ground floor in diagonal, so they could deflect the forces towards the columns. And it works. So this is captions from the 3D model we made at the time, in which you see it's a kind of a roof model, there were no really representations of the project to present it to the client because it's us, so no real effort of representation. And then on the ground floor, you have the diagonal columns that appeared. The construction of the structure. You see the massive wooden slab, which was realized by just juxtaposing beams and to fix them mechanically to each other. It's a very straightforward way of working, which seems very simple, but it was quite complicated for the contractor because the geometry of the building is completely at random. So every piece had to be cut on the right dimension. Picture from the workshop. You see the hemp insulation in the back. And the system of the diagonal columns, they go together with some small steel elements that are needed to solve the horizontal forces. And then at the very end of the project, we thought it could be nice to do some nice documents, just to for the pleasure of having some beautiful documents too. So this section was drawn, and this other exploded section. And axonometry from the bottom. In green, it's the concrete structures, and in red, the wooden add-ons. And while outside the storm rages, countless tales are told of fabulous islands and wonderful cities within their high walls. However, a haggard-faced wanderer approaches the tavern with startling news. Next week, Rome has fallen. Tu n'entends pas sur le...
Moi, je vois deux types qui parlent d'un autre projet, deux Allemands. Tu m'as envoyé un lien, je suis dans une autre conférence. Et à mon avis, tu n'auras pas aussi.
Just wondering, do you hear and see me?
Yes, we do. All works fine.
Okay, fine. Sorry, I just got contrary information from above. I'll go on. However, a haggard-faced wanderer approaches the tavern with startling news. Next week, Rome has fallen. I will lead you through a couple of pictures of the building when it was recently finished. This is a non-heated space on the ground floor, so the entrance hall, which is mostly an empty space. You can see it's used for skateboarding and also as an extension of the workshop for when there is an exhibition, for example, or for some works when needed. In the workshop, that's where we are now. Going up, we are here in the non-heated living space, which is in fact also part of the staircase. So the fact that it's not heated also allows not to care that the heat would disappear in the attic. You see the wooden slab inside the house. Inside the house. I don't know if it requires a lot of comment. There were also lots of opportunities that just appeared, like you see on the ceiling, there is this skylight, which was in fact a former staircase, the one that we saw in red in the first pictures. So above it, we have the greenhouse, so it was used to bring in light. What is quite interesting too is by this movement of retracting inside the structures is that from let's say the living core of the building, there is always a kind of transition through another space before going outside, which allows to increase the distance and the intimacy towards the neighbor. And I think the benefit is mutual. Looking in the other direction. The greenhouse. And for the moment, we are working in the editing of a book about the process. And the graphic designers suggested that these architectural pictures are very beautiful, but they are quite empty and a little bit too neutral as a representation. And so they suggested that we, the inhabitants, would each also take own pictures. So what we did during the summer is that the four of us, we all had a single-use camera, and we all took pictures. And so the next pictures, they are coming from these, let's say, more subjective look on things. And it's also more inhabited. It was during the summer. That's the greenhouse with the neighbors. It's really a very nice place. It becomes too hot when there is sun in summer. But even now in December, January, when there is a little bit of sun, it's really a very cool place. The terrace on the first floor. The same terrace in the other direction. Again, the same terrace. The railings, they were reused from another construction site that was ongoing in Charleroi, the project that you will see later. This is the garden on the ground floor for the workshop. The same garden. You see that the idea of avoiding concrete also found an expression here to reinforce the concrete slab of the terrace. This is the front garden looking towards the kitchen. The front garden with the beams that we maintained when demolishing the volume on the front. And the concrete was not treated, so we know that there is the risk of carbonation and let's say structural problems with time, but without that we will see later. And it's an outside structure, so anyway it's a kind of postponing of the demolition in the very long term. But since there is no weight anymore, probably even if there are some problems appearing over the coming decades, it should not be really a huge problem. And this is the entrance from the street when arriving in the house. Classes and specializations, labor and entertainment, commodity and urbanism, ideology and the state, we have established that everything is to be thrown away. To introduce the next project, it's maybe useful to have a very short detour to a competition we did in, I think it was in 2012, but I'm not sure. You see the yellow brick building. The commune was asking to demolish the building and to replace it by a passive standard building. And already at the time, we did this kind of exercise, which was to check, is it a good idea, the demolition? I think the above graph is in energy per square meter over time. And what we saw is that between a passive reconstruction or a low energy refurbishment, after 80 years, we still could not justify the demolition. And economically, it was even worse. After 800 years, you still did not win back the money of the investment of the demolition and reconstruction. Probably it's a little bit pessimistic, But it led us to say, let's not demolish this building. And at the time, we lost the competition because of that. This project is about our office building and to be replaced by a school inside the stones of the existing office building. There are two projects following each other. I will only stick here to the first stage, which was the school was moving in the building. And so we had to find a solution to house the first classes inside the building. And the idea that it could be a temporary use and that a project would follow after to continue or to think otherwise. So what we were doing needed to be to reflect the fact that we did not know at the time if what we were doing was going to be definitive or not. It's a kind of beautiful building, an exoskeleton in concrete, part of a huge site. It's Takeda, it's a manufacturer of medicine, and they were moving away. So the site was divided and we are tackling the front buildings. And in fact, the school was only to be housed in the first stage in the right part of the building. A beautiful garden that it's a bit strange to imagine for a school, but it was there. The quality of the building was quite good. On the ground floor, you even already had some small auditoria that could be used as classes. And then on the levels, there were office spaces, and these offices were made with a modular system of cloison walls that in fact were very, very high quality. They were good for acoustics. The finishing was quite okay. You can wonder if it's really beautiful, but it was really a good quality and probably better than we could pay for by making new walls. So it seemed to be interesting to consider that in the project. And in the end, the project is quite simple. It's focusing on three main interventions. One is the organization of the classrooms on the levels, and then there are two small additions to the building to propose a roof for the playground and to add an emergency staircase, which was necessary for the school and which was not necessary for the offices, so it needed to be added. We started to look at the modular system of the separation walls, how it was built, and start to imagine how we could use it in these drawings. They were there for the competition, I think. In white, you have the modules that are available, and then in color, it's the additions that we would have to implement in order to adapt the system to the new situation, because we were also removing the false ceilings to have a little bit more of height in the circulation and in the classrooms. It's a school, bigger crowds, you need a little bit more space. So the modular system was not high enough. So it was really a very intense work of measuring what was available to see which panels we could use on which space, and then to really implement the small additions that were needed to be able to reuse this material. And then some other materials were available there and were reused because they just were there, and also because of the possibly temporary nature of the work at the time. It was not that we started the project by saying this really needs to be a highly circular project, because it's not a kind of a priori ideology that we had at the time, but it was just there. There was not a lot of money. It was possibly only for a couple of months. And so it just came naturally in this case as a kind of, you know, let's be intelligent and not do useless things. I think at the very beginning of the works, the contractor suggested to throw away everything and to replace that by plasterboard. And of course, we refused. But what we see and what we have seen also in the project of the house here, it's that by reusing materials, what is quite interesting is that instead of investing the money in materials that are produced somewhere, you invest in the adaptation on site, which means that you really localize the economy. You invest in the people working on the construction site. And it was quite intriguing and interesting to see that. You see the walls with the blue windows, which is the existing system, and then complemented with simply the plywood panels, the concrete ceilings that appear, and the techniques that become apparent. Strange classrooms, but what is quite nice is that the building is not made for school, so the thickness of the building does not allow to have a central corridor with classes on both sides. So the circulation is always on one side, which gives really a lot of light in the building and quite generous circulation. So it's in fact, we also notice when reusing buildings that you quite often have this kind of excess of space that just comes through the fact that the existing situation was not meant for the use you implement in it, and it gives a lot of beautiful opportunities. Ventilation, more circulation. And then on the outside, there were two small additions, the roof and the staircase. And for them, as we don't know what will happen later, let's make them maybe dismountable, so that in the second project, they could be dismounted and reused if the project asks for it. And so it became a wooden construction, very simple, mechanically fixed, so it can be easily dismounted. It's not a very spectacular structure, but it became so. And it gives a kind of informality to the space, which is quite fitting in contrast with the more static office-like architecture. And then the same for the staircase, in which we wanted to make the structure in wood and then to have the stairs in steel. But in the end, it became all wood except for the stairs themselves. A kind of a very robust utilitarian structure. In the reality of the works, it was quite complicated for the calculation of the structure and for the responsibilities of who would do the calculations and so on. But I think it's a little bit what happens with all these things of reuse is that you step a little bit outside the regulated, normalized world. And so you have this kind of interaction in which people need at some point to say, okay, let's just do it and we will see what happens. In the end, in the second stage of the project, which we happened to win, of course, we developed the project so as not to undo the first stage. So the staircase, the roof, and the organization of this wing of the building remained. So it was, as it always is, a temporary solution which became definitive. The war was bound to come as a confrontation over change, There was nothing left of the character of a struggle between conservation and change. The owners of the society were forced to seek a change that was the opposite of ours in order to maintain themselves. Their achievements suffice to reflect our ambitions in negative. You recognize the picture, of course. That's a small interlude. At the office, we have a kind of a splash screen that we use for home in our browsers, and each collaborator on his turn proposes a series of images, and it was Thomas Montelet, whose name is here, who proposed a series of pictures of construction sites of well-known buildings. And it's really interesting to see this moment that precedes all the images that we all know. For example, I did not know that the roof was just lifted completely at once there. It's incredible. That's a building in Antwerp. You see the cladding of the facade that has begun. This relationship between the structure and the skin, quite actual topic. Also the informality that sometimes happen and that you really see as a quality of the space, which sometimes disappears when the works are finished, and sometimes you can still see at the end. And this one I find the most extraordinary one. It's the Villa Müller of Adolf Loos, and you probably know this very refined interior with all the marble and the stones and the wood, a very crafted interior. But then when you see the construction site, it's a kind of messy, thrown together set of materialities. And in fact, it's quite nice too. You have an incredible energy of the space, and I don't know, you almost wonder, maybe it was okay like that too. This one is a picture of the exhibition palace in Charleroi, which is the next project and last one. It's still a picture from the construction site. It's really a huge building. It's about 60,000 square meters next to the city center, which makes the articulation with the vast landscapes of the post-industrial, well, here still industrial, but now post-industrial landscape. And we were asked to refurbish it without changing the use of it. So it was an exhibition palace, and it would remain an exhibition palace. The point is that it's 60,000 square meters, and when Charleroi was in its industrial glory, it made sense. But today, 1/3 of the surface is more than enough for this kind of building. So we had this huge building and a program that was, in fact, much too little for the building, and in the incapacity also to provide new programs because the context of the European funding would not allow, but also because there is such a decrease in the economy of the city that, in fact, there is no program wanting to go there either. So the building is just too big. Some pictures from the interior, from the archives. In the central part, you have some majestic staircases and spaces. It's an interesting building because it navigates between kind of utilitarian architecture and then a very monumental, expressive architecture. Quite interesting. And that's the situation a year or two ago. Yeah, you see this kind of monumental things, a little bit weird, from the late 40s, start of the 50s. I was told these were the largest spans in Europe at the time of the construction, so the largest beams over a roofed space. I don't know if it's true, but it's about 60 meters. The building is really amazing. A very interesting color code that grew over the years. some pink spaces, green staircases, yellow columns. Yeah, these kind of spaces. And when you start opening up some spaces, then you see the confrontations of the colors, which are quite interesting. And then what I was telling at the beginning of the slope that is visible in some parts of the building. So it's not a basement because on the street, it's really street level on the left of the picture, but then it's inside the hill on the other side. And these kind of fantastic situations. In the central part where you have these staircases, there is also a hidden garden, which is not really a garden, it's a courtyard, almost invisible from the inhabited spaces. And at the competition, we proposed to open up this central space. In fact, the brief said to provide a zero energy building. So we proposed to simply open it and not provide a building, which was also zero energy, but still to use it for the circulation between the different halls. So it would become a kind of a vertical exterior park with stairs, mechanical staircases, elevators, which would give access to the different levels. A little bit a conceptual approach, but they decided to believe us, and so we could start. At some point, we were also asked to put parking on the lower level next to the street, which in fact we discovered made the project impossible, because by doing so you had to insulate the entire floor of the upper level due to the energy regulations. So in fact what we proposed was to inverse that and to make the exhibition only in the left part, so really a concentration of the program in the 1/3 of the surface, to use the central part for the circulation, a kind of communication between the lower city and the high part of the city center, and to use the halls on the right as they are for the parking, because some parking is needed. The space is there, so it will be parking with a ceiling of 10 meters high each time. But it's there and it's almost for free. Some pictures of the scale model. The green railings are the existing stairs, and we just copied them one level below in order to connect all the levels. And then one electric staircase is also added in this new landscape. I forgot to mention this project we don't do alone. It's an association between AgwA with Jan de Velde Ingevink, architecten in Ghent. You probably know the name. This is a model in which you see the slope. And so the construction started, revealing all kinds of incredible situations. And just as happened with Verbist, the house, in the middle of the construction site, something happened, but a little bit differently. We were removing some asbestos too. What happened is that next to the exhibition palace, the city had also a project for a Congress palace, which at some point they decided to stop because of economic reasons. And so they turned at us and asked if, with an additional budget, of course, we could integrate this Congress facility in the building, which of course seemed to be a good idea because the building was simply way too big. So to introduce this would fortify the programmation. And also as an addition to reinforce some, to refurbish additional roofs, and also to complement the landscape approach of the project. So this is a feasibility study that we made, in which, in fact, we just suggested to demineralize the entire landscape around it, to convert it in a kind of natural reserve in the city. Very low maintenance, very low cost also. To invite the nature inside the building through the slope. In the middle of the exhibition halls, to the middle level, to place there the Congress Center in direct relationship with the garden. And then they also wanted to have a concert hall, but we didn't have the money for that, and also could not afford to do the acoustic regulations. So we instead proposed to not do it, but to use the parking on the lower floor and the exhibition hall as two kind of festival grounds. So there is a very little additional equipment needed. Basically, it's electricity and some additional emergency exits. And we can have there about 10,000 people for big festivals. So this is the plan on the upper floor, where you see the green landscape that is becoming a kind of prolongation of the existing slopes. In fact, we demolish in front of what we call the colonnade. We demolished a level there that is in fact in very bad condition for the moment. So the natural slopes reappear completely. On the intermediary level, so this is one level lower, we have the Congress facility, which you see is a simple plasterboard box in the middle, and with a large circulation and a loggia looking out to the central garden. It's a very simple thing, in fact. And then the festival ground on the ground floor, on the left part, it's a parking, but on some occasions you can organize a concert. And on the right, we have the new room that we made there for exhibition halls, but you can also perfectly organize a concert there. This is a rendering from the phase of the Congress Center that we had to integrate. It's a very complex situation because the works are ongoing for the moment, and we are about to start this new stage in the framework of an ongoing construction site. So the existing situation is changing every day. It was very complicated for anticipating where we would be when starting the works, but also a very thrilling situation. So we are looking there towards the loggia and the foyer, the lobby of the Congress Center. And here we are in the lobby. So on the right, you have a kind of black box, literally, with the 3 auditoria. On the left, you have the loggia, which is outside and is really already part of the gardens. It is not the most sublime theory that could ever guarantee the event. On the contrary, it is the accomplished event that guarantees the theory. So one has to take risks and pay cash afterwards. Just a series of pictures that were taken in fall, I would say, start of the winter, a couple of months ago. So we are here in the lower street. You see the slope, the park in front. We suggested to the client that we should not work on it because we felt it's a little bit out of our scope. So the city we cut the site in two, and now they are doing another project there for a skate park, basically. But the work on the exhibition palace and the Congress Center is too intensive for the moment, so we were not able to tackle this also. And we think also it's nice that it allows others to intervene in the context of the project. We approach the central garden. We turn the corner. You see on the right, the lower level, the parking is open on the street. And then you have the stacked park. We had to protect the concrete, contrary to Verbist, where we decided not to protect them because of the fact that you have to be able to give guarantees on the structure for the long term. We battled a little bit to try to avoid that because we wanted to keep the original colors and patina of the concrete, but also if the structure would be ruined because of carbonatation, it would be over a time span of, let's say, 30 years, 40 years, maybe 50 years. And who knows where the city will be in 50 years. 50 years ago, it was a flourishing industry. Now it's really a painful economical situation. And in the future, we don't know. So it felt a little bit strange to us to invest in these coatings, which because of the surface are very expensive. It's about 1 million to protect them. But in the end, it was decided by the client to do it, so we obeyed. But we wanted really to keep the idea of the former uses of the building by repainting in the existing colors. So that's why the strange color patterns is still there. And the concretes that were not painted at the time or that were revealed by the demolitions, they are painted white. So you have the combinations of the colors and of the white, which you can use to understand the evolution of the building. It's a really incredibly photogenic environment. And in fact, our action there is very little. It's a couple of openings and then removing the facades. And even before adding the new staircases, it's incredible. You see the slope there in the background, which we will make a little bit smoother, so you will have a better view to the city just by moving ground around on the plot. Because we cannot export the ground out of the plot because it's polluted. So if we remove it, we have to treat it, and it's incredibly expensive. And also moving it out of the plot means that it will be stored somewhere else. So it's in fact better to just keep it on the plot because the level of pollution is of such a nature that it's not a problem for public spaces. It's almost like discovering a ruin in the desert. The new infills in blocks to close off the parkings, so they are not considered exterior spaces, and that means that we don't have to treat the concretes there. You see the scale of the structure with the guy painting there. As we repaint in the same colors, it means that some columns, they are partly painted because they were painted where they were visible, but now by removing the facades, they are not painted on the other side. So some columns are partly yellow, partly white. So we really had to have good conversations with the painters to explain the principle so that they could apply it without having to call us every 30 minutes to know where they had to paint in which colors. But it works quite well. You pass an era like you pass the Punta de la Dogana, it is to say rather quickly. First of all, you don't look at it while it's coming. Then you discover it when you reach it, and you have to agree that it was built like that and not otherwise. But already you are doubling the cape and moving into unknown waters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harold, for the intriguing lecture and the thoughts and clever, meaningful, but also very beautiful projects. It was really exciting to listen. And coming back to one of your first slides with the Borg, it's of course now to the audience to be agitated or get into the mode of agitation. So everyone's welcome to ask questions and to read them out loud. And maybe while people are doing that, I take the chance to ask the first one.
Please.
Looking at the projects and the images you've shown, it was interesting to compare it to the work we're doing with the students in Dresden, because it's a very, very different setup. So we're converting a very large chain hotel from the Hilton company with small interventions in a big block. And of course, we haven't asked them if they want that. So eventually we will present them with our projects as little gifts and opportunities, but they don't really know. But of course, what this shows is that for this thinking of transformation, it's very important to have dialogue and to process things in a conversation, to negotiate things with user groups, possibly, because the process needs a certain kind of openness, open-mindedness. And I wondered how that works with your projects, the collaboration with clients. Is that fruitful? Is it hindering sometimes? Does it help? And the projects are all different, because in the first one, you have been part of the client group. So I think it's interesting to compare how that works in the actual practice to let these projects evolve.
Yeah, I think every setting is a little bit different, probably. If I just would refer to the three projects I've just shown, in the first one, yeah, I'm part of the client. So it's, and my wife is architect also. In fact, it's a setting in which there is no formal relationship. I mean, it's just all on the corner of the table talk, and it allowed us, for example, to change completely the project when we after starting the works, and that would be more complicated with a classical client, for example. So I think probably it's not very comparable. However, I think the fact that it's an existing building impacts a lot, because, for example, the issue of the structure would have happened in any case, because it's just something that we discovered when really starting the works, and we were not able to do the tests properly before. So you have to be able to react to these situations in a constructive way, just to make the project better and not just as solving problems. So it is demanding in the sense that you need to be able to face these situations and to bring them to another level together with the client. In the case of the school, I would say it was so fast, and they just needed to move in. The talks were more with the contractor. There you really have to find ways of doing things, to measure things, but that's more because of the reuse of materials, the approach of circularity in the project, that you really have to be very present as an architect also, because you need to be able to think together about how to solve situations. But it was less an issue for the client, I think, in this case. And then on the case of Charleroi, there it is really the relationship with the client was really incredibly good. It was very complicated at the beginning because they were very formal, in the way of treating us, very legalist in a way. But they were very open in how to achieve the project with the limited means that they had. They knew it was not sufficient. So they were very open to all the proposals that we made. In fact, at some point they said, look, in fact, we need to be able to call that a Congress Center, or we need to be able to call that an exhibition hall. It don't really need to be the high-tech thing, but we need to get rid of this European money, just to use it in the time frame. And we need the building to be maintained also. And so with these two ambitions, we were quite free to be very creative with the situation. And I think it needs to be noted that the openness of the clients there was really fundamental. The moving of the parking on the lower floor towards one part of the building in a stacked situation happened just a couple of weeks before the introduction of the building permit, which means that the previous phases were already approved by the city. So they were really open enough to say, okay, let's approve something different because otherwise it will not work. So yeah, the process is indeed very important in these situations.
And the clients are willing enough to be as flexible as you, because you spoke about informality, which one can see as an attitude that it's important that you can react to different situations, but also there's a certain relaxedness that you're showing about things and things that you can't control fully. You don't, like leaving the polluted ground in Charleroi. Some sort of laissez-faire, laisser passer les choses, and the same. You said something in your own house that we see behind you. You think that the concrete structure will probably okay, but it's not this architecture of eliminating all risks in the process and making sure everything works and it's all perfect, which is a culture here in Germany. And maybe the pressure, the financial pressure, also the pressure of creating schools, which you had in Belgium, helps to trigger new solutions and new thinking also on the client side.
I think it means two things. The first one is that to make a strong project, you need to have a very clear idea at some point of what it is about. For example, in Charleroi, the opening of the central part, that's the project. And from there, yeah, let's go. No? It doesn't matter anymore. And so that leads me to the second point, is that next to the very strong or clear idea, it needs to question the expectations that you have in comfort and everything, but also in the detailing, the smoothness of the things, the refinement of the details. It's something that it really helps if you can just let go of this in some way. There are lots of situations in which, in fact, we don't say to the contractor, but in fact, we don't care. They just do it and it will be fine. Mm-hmm. And it gives a lot of relaxedness towards this. And I think it also makes the quality better in the end. It clarifies what it's about.
Other questions from your side?
Yeah, so we maybe first I read a question from the audience. Do you see your design as something finished, or do you think about coming changes, and what role does that play in your design process?
In general.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a little bit difficult to answer questions like this, which give the impression that there would be a kind of a political agenda to a practice, and it's not really the case. I think we tackle projects as they come and try to do something nice out of it. So it's not. I cannot give a general answer, but I would say. The projects that we do, in fact, due to the context, they are never finished. Charleroi is the example. We just started doing an exhibition palace, and then in the middle of the construction site, it becomes a Congress palace. How do you do? And so I think there was a first movement in which we even attempted to invite other architects to do it inside the building, to say, please intervene. In fact, we invited 3 different architects because we thought it could be several interventions in the building. It didn't work because the time schedule was too tight. The complexity of the building was too immense. So all the time they were coming with ideas or suggestions, and we said, yeah, but you know, that really doesn't work. So in the end, we decided just to do it. But even like that, the idea to invite them was quite interesting because it allowed to start the conversations about, again, what do we want to achieve with this, and to have a clear idea. In Takeda, the school, the fact that we thought of the project as something that was going to be reversed after a couple of months or years also gives an indication. And I think most contexts in which we work, they are quite unstable. Sometimes we don't even know the users because, you know, it will be a non-profit organization, and then in the end it's another one, and it just changes. And so the way they use the building changes. They do modifications inside it. So yeah, no. We hope that things that we do can survive the changes that they will bring. You know, that something will be left, and that the quality that we try to bring in some situation will be strong enough so that it continues even if life goes on and things changes around it.
Sure.
Which is another idea of permanence compared to a Vitruvian sense, or on deciding which things are hard and stay and which things are soft and change. And the insulation is like a jumper, and you don't care about the thermal line of U values as much as it's taught in the school books.
Yeah, and then maybe in relation to that, I was also wondering what role building codes and regulations play in your design process, because I mean, I don't know exactly, obviously building codes are different in every country, but when I looked at your projects, I was like constantly thinking whether that would be possible in Germany, where especially schools are very, very difficult things to build in terms of regulations, but also transformation projects in general and larger buildings made of timber, for example. There's a real, I think the regulations are really behind, quite a few years behind the designs and also the industrial products that we have now. So I was wondering whether you have any, like what your experiences are with that, and also whether you have any suggestions on what needs to change.
It's sometimes regulations are bad, and sometimes they are good. I don't know. The problem with the regulations and the norms and everything, it's that it's all written in the idea of anticipation. You need to be able to say what level of anything you will have, no? Which level of insulation, which energy consumption, which level of light, which slope you will have for the wheelchairs. Everything needs to be anticipated. And of course, when you are in very rough or complicated refurbishment situations, you will see on the construction site, so you don't know at the beginning. And so I think there is a flaw in the formulation of the norms and regulations that are made for the moment, because they don't really allow for that, or they're not made in this idea of adaptation. And but now, for example, two examples which are contradictory. In Charleroi, we moved the ground floor parkings to the right wing building to just stack them there and concentrate the exhibition halls in one building, because we went to the region, the Walloon region, for the energy regulations, and they said, no problem, but you need to insulate the entire floor. And it was a catastrophe. We said, but you understand, it doesn't make sense, because the building is not insulated for the moment, so it doesn't change anything. And they said, yeah, it's the regulation, it's like that. Ciao. And so we had a big problem, because the project became just unfeasible. And from there, we reacted by saying, okay, let's think a little bit about it. And so we had this new compartmentation of the building, with the parking on one side and the halls on the other. And it's 10 times better. So it's there, the regulation really helped us to refine the project, really. And the other case is here at Verbist. When you refurbish a building, if you don't modify too much the skin, you have no requirements on the total energy of the building. So we were allowed to do this because we consider the entire perimeter of the building as the existing perimeter, even if we don't heat this part. But if we would have said that the new perimeter of the heated zone was what it is in reality, the project was not feasible, because then it had to become a passive standard house, and you cannot do that because of all the joints, and it becomes really impossible. So there we were able to squeeze the norms in order to make use of another interpretation of what is the protected area, and so it became feasible. So you have I don't know, sometimes you have to face the regulation and make use of it to make it better, and sometimes you can just circumnavigate it and bend it, and but never accept it as it is. That's the point, I think. It's always try to understand what it's about, and where are the places where you can make sense out of the regulation, to maintain a critical attitude towards it. And of course, these norms and regulations, they are not formulated in order to trigger this critical mindset. So it would be interesting to imagine how to write norms and regulations in order to force people to think. Not easy.
Yeah, totally. No, but also I think there's a real need for regulations that are written especially with transformations in mind. You know, it seems like all regulations and building codes are just for new builds, and that's like a huge problem, because it doesn't obviously encourage people to transform and reuse.
Yeah, I don't know, it is in your case, but here, for many regulations, when it's an existing building, you have to negotiate. Mm-hmm. So that's quite good, because you know what the regulation is, and then you try to go towards these levels. But sometimes you can say, look, it doesn't work. So we can do this. Maybe we can balance by doing something different and some parts. So this negotiation margin is quite interesting. It doesn't apply for everything, but it allows for, in refurbishment, it's a good argument to keep buildings too. Because if you don't keep them, then you have no margin of interpretation. And if you maintain them, then at once you are allowed to do crazy things.
So let's look for the gray zones of transformation to play some tricks. Thomas, are there more questions at the moment?
There are a few, but I think most of them have already been answered in conversation.
Then, because time is running and you have already performed for a while, but maybe then I have a last question, something that we didn't talk about. These processes are exciting but complex, and your three are also teaching, so I'd be interested how you progress these issues at university in a short period of time, but also at places like here in Germany where the sensation of something new built in a firework of forms is of course always or still more appealing at universities than subtle transformations. And I wonder how you play that in a different cultural context in Belgium and at your school with your way of teaching.
Yeah, maybe first we are for the moment 3 partners, but at the office we are about 19 people for the moment. And out of the 19, I think that about 7 are teaching, 7 or 8. So it's really a lot. I think it makes that there are lots of influences inside the office, which is really valuable. So we really like that. It's not always easy to manage all the part-times, but it's very interesting. Also in the conversations that we can have. And then I cannot talk of the pedagogical projects of everybody, of course. But because we were very interested in the Charleroi project, we started a studio between Benoit van den Bulk mainly at Liège and myself at KU Leuven, with some participations of other universities. Was one studio of Benoit Burkel also. TU Wien was also involved at some point. And we worked in the city of Charleroi, because in fact the city is full of these situations of half abandoned buildings, which nobody knows what to do with them. And so to think about this oversize aspect of the buildings, buildings being too big for the use that you can see on site, without adding program, but trying to re-engage the building in the city and in informal uses and stuff, we thought was very interesting. So for 3 years we did studios on that. I must say that sometimes in a framework in which students have to choose the studios in which they will work, I noticed that some other studios are more popular. And so maybe it's related to, for example, Charleroi, it's really the place where you don't want to go, which is a big error because it's really a very interesting and incredible city. Lots of interesting architecture, but you have these kind of ideas, and then working on a building without a program, it sounds a little bit complicated. But the results were, I found always very, it was always very inspiring, and I think the students were very happy in the end of, working with the 2 hands in reality. I think that's really an incredible opportunity, and at least I really appreciate it. I don't know if it's an answer to the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's it sounds like the school is also a good testing ground for different scenarios within the same framework, because these things we talked about are not always entirely clear and obvious, and so it's good to try different things at once, which in the office doesn't always work, but in a studio is possible.
Sometimes topics that seem to be a little bit less sexy are very interesting, and then you attract the interesting students. I don't know.
I'm sure you do. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, and we also enjoyed your background, which is the project that you've been showing earlier. Yeah. So yeah, for many reasons, it was a real pleasure to listen to you. Thanks for joining us and coming to TU Dresden.
Okay, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to be here.
Great. We
Thank
have
you.
a third talk, which is on the 2nd of February by Ben Spelz from London. So that would be another position that we bring to Dresden from outside of Germany. And he will also show us a cross-section of, again, very different kinds of transformations. Good. Okay, so I hope to see you all then, and take care and stay healthy. Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.